Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Podcast of the Rings, a podcast where we go deep into the lore of Tolkien so that you don't have to. I am joined as ever by my partner on the podcast and in life, Alexander Mitchell. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
Hello. You know, I realize that this show has longevity past the Amazon Prime series Rings of Power. Should we need it? Should we want it? Should the audience want it?
There is so much that we could talk about that's not in the Second Age that, yeah, this show could very well go on for years and years and years.
Is that what you want, though?
I always want to talk about Tolkien.
Well, what makes us different from other podcasts, though? Like, what would the longevity, why would we have longevity? Are we different enough?
I enjoy it, and I think that's all that matters.
It's our personalities that keep people coming back.
Yeah, exactly. Who else is going to have a rap featuring one of the Noldor elves? I dare any other podcast to make that claim. Although, maybe.
I'm sure they could.
There is an amazing Tolkien, I guess, creator. He's on TikTok, No Betta Do Betta, and he actually did do a rap. I saw it on social media related to Fingon and Sauron, and they have a duel.
Come on.
It's great.
You're saying it's not original what I did?
Well, no, it is. He does it from, I believe, Sauron's perspective.
All right.
So,
but I was saying Fingon, and
yeah.
maybe that is Sauron saying that. I'm
Could
Sauron because that's Fingon. He's been gone. Anyway, I'm sure people really love this recurring joke.
Yeah, every episode.
Every single episode.
Prepare yourselves,
and
folks.
For those of you that are just maybe joining us for the first time ever, this is the Podcast of the Rings, where I know what Tolkien is. I like the Lord of the Rings. I read the books, but I didn't read the Silmarillion, and I don't think I care to. But I'm dating a guy who really knows a lot about this stuff, and it's crazy.
I've read Silmarillion. I've read Unfinished Tales. I've not read all of the companion material, but a lot. So we're coming at this from different perspectives.
Correct. You're so braggy, though, about it. It's so gross.
Okay.
He's a Tolkien elitist. Exceptionalist.
No, we're not elitists
Apologist.
on this podcast. Tolkien
No,
is for everyone. We're trying to extend a hand and bring you in, even if you know nothing. You can
bring
enjoy
you into
this
our
world.
relationship. So, Alex, so far we've talked about Galadriel, Gil-galad, during the third and the fourth.
Mm-hmm.
The rise and fall of Numenor, part 1. Who else did we talk about?
What are the big ones?
Missing what?
Elrond.
Yeah, but you should just let me have a
sorry.
second.
I was trying to help you.
Okay, thanks, lover.
Okay.
And so this week, I think you said we were going to continue on with the Numenorians and get into Isildur a little bit.
They, Elendil, Isildur, and Aryan entered our tale towards the end last time, so we're going to pick up with them, and I think we're going to talk about the foundation of the realms in exile. And we're going to talk about a little bit of the aftermath of the War of the Last Alliance, which we've mentioned before because Gil-galad was a part of that, Elrond was a part of that, pretty much everybody around was a part of that, including Durin. So we're going to take a brief look forward into the Third Age. We're not going to get too in-depth, but I think it's cool to see the connective tissue between that and the tale of the Lord of the Rings.
I like that.
Because all of this is interconnected.
Ew. Okay. I just liked it. We got it, and then you kept on talking.
Before we dive into that, There was news today.
Okay.
So this is breaking as of recording.
News. Clearly, I don't even know it.
I just read it a little bit earlier today, and I'm very excited. This character will feature in what we're going to talk about today, has popped up in a couple other characters, is a very important character in the world and the Second Age. Círdan, the shipwright.
Círdan.
One of the oldest living elves in Middle-earth, has been confirmed that he will be appearing in Season 2.
Season 2.
So
are they already making Season 2?
I don't know if it's in production, but they're definitely doing multiple seasons. Amazon has put a lot of money behind this project.
Whether it does well or not, they will.
Well, I think it'll do well.
Well, that's your opinion, baby.
I think it'll do well because you're going to have, we've talked about this, you're going to have people like us who are excited and passionate about this world and are excited for the show. And then you're going to have the people who are just going to hate watch it. So, hey, they don't care what your motivations are for watching it. They just care you watch it. So I think it's going to be successful in terms of numbers. I don't know how many seasons exactly it's going to be or if they've confirmed that, but we're for sure, I think, getting a handful of seasons. So Círdan has been confirmed. Now, what's cool about Círdan, this is a tangent, but I thought it's appropriate since this news just came out today. The only elf, well, because people have made this huge kerfuffle about the elven hair, right? We see Robert Arameo with the short hair. Mm-hmm. And people saying, oh, well, Tolkien only ever described elves with long hair, which there is some, I will say there is some textual evidence that he did pretty much describe elves with long hair, but he never explicitly said they only had long hair. So it's fine. In my opinion, Círdan is the only elf described to have a beard.
Interesting.
So it will be interesting to see how they portray Círdan. Beardless.
Mm-hmm. That's actually the most important thing now.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm trying to recall the timeline under which Círdan starts playing a factor. And so by the fact that he's going to be in Season 2, that does say something about the timeline of story that we're going to get in Season 1, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they're taking liberties with the timeline, so who knows? Who knows what they're going to do with their version of the story? Círdan doesn't necessarily... He's kind of ever present in a lot of the events and is present in a lot of key moments, so they can pick and choose exactly how they're going to introduce him. And again, yeah, I have no idea because I don't know where they're going to end Season 1, what's going to happen, where they're going to diverge from the canon.
Do something that he's in or not.
Yeah, they could invent an entirely new reason for him to get involved with.
Well, look, when the camera was looking this way, he was over here, and we just weren't talking to him.
Exactly. They're filling in a lot of the holes. So
right.
I'm just excited that it's confirmed we're going to see him. And so soon. So
soon, he says. What episode did we cover Círdan, if you want to remind our friends?
We haven't.
Never mind. We talked about
We will
him.
In the future.
But we talked about him.
Oh, yeah. He was present, in
the Galadriel story.
Yeah.
Or the Elrond
Galadriel, Gil-galad, Elrond, like, he's involved with all of that stuff.
All right, forget it. All right.
But we didn't, I thought you were saying, when did we do an episode on Círdan?
No, I know we didn't.
Okay. Yeah.
I couldn't even remember Elrond. You're right. How would I know anything?
Okay.
All right. Well, I think let's get into it, Alex, shall we?
Yes. Let us dive in. So, when we last left our story, we'll do a bit of a recap. We had Numenor falling due to the hubris of Ar-Pharazôn attacking Aman, and Elendil, with his people, with his two sons, sailed off the east coast of Numenor before its destruction. They escaped.
Right. And that's one of two of the people, like one of two contingencies that escaped, right?
Well, the faithful were led by Amandil, Elendil's father. And remember, Amandil went to talk to the Valar and never returned.
Right.
And then there were the Kingsmen who were faithful to Ar-Pharazôn, and they all went down with the ship, pun intended, went down with the ship as Numenor sank, or were attacking Aman and were sunk beneath the waves.
Just remind me though, wasn't there a contingency that's like landed on the south shores?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yes. So during this journey, the ships were separated because a freaking island sank and the world was reshaped. It's going to be a rough ride.
I see. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Sure. So they became separated. You had Elendil landing in the north near Lindon, where Gil-galad was, and you had Isildur and Anarion landing in the south near Pelargir, which was one of the sort of havens that was set up by the faithful. And with them on this journey, they brought some relics from Numenor. Among these being a couple important things.
Palantirs.
The Palantiri. So the plural is Palantiri.
Okay.
Just got to be a little stickler on that. Not Palantirs. So
they're not volunteering there. Okay.
No. So you had the 7 Palantiri that they took with them, and you also had a couple of heirlooms. You had the Scepter of Anúminas, which was, the different members of the Council of the Scepter had their own kind of token. So there was the one that the ruler had, which obviously sank, but Elendil brought the Scepter of Anúminas, and so that became a symbol of rulership for the Númenóreans in exile. You also had Narsil, which becomes a very important weapon later on. You had the Seedling of Nimloth, which was taken by Isildur.
Yes.
Right, which will become
important. I thought
it
was a fruit. That would have seeds in it.
Yeah, he did get the fruit and then grew that into a seedling.
I understand now. And that's just me just trying to prove that I'm listening, but carry on.
You then also have the Ring of Barahir. Now, this has an interesting history. These are kinds of the 3 things: Narsil, or it would later become reforged into Andúril, the Ring of Barahir, and the Scepter of Anúminas. These are kind of the things that, everybody knows there's an heir by the time of Aragorn, but he has all these 3 things. Or actually, I believe he's given the scepter after his coronation, but these are kind of the tokens of like, I am, the heir, the rightful high king of the realms in exile. But the Ring of Barahir has an interesting history. Finrod, Galadriel's brother, took this ring from Valinor, from Aman, with him when they were exiled. And it was made by the Noldor elves. And during the Dagor Bragollach, which was one of the battles of the War of Beleriand.
Was that the fire one?
Yes, the Battle of Sudden Flame, I think is the translation. Finrod's life was saved by Barahir, who is Berin's father. So Beren of Beren and Luthien, who is an ancestor to this line of kings. Because Beren and Luthien have Dior has Elwing, and then Elwing has Elros and Elrond, and then from Elros descends the line of kings. So Finrod gives him this ring, and it's then named the Ring of Barahir, and it's passed on through his lineage, eventually all the way down, as we said, to Aragorn. And this is one of the things he has to kind of prove his claim to the throne when we get there. But just a cool history there, how far back it goes, all the way back to the Noldor in Aman. It has a very long and interesting pedigree to it. So they bring all these things with them to the realms in exile. They're separated during this journey. And when Elendil lands upon the shores of Middle-earth, I just wanted to take the opportunity to flex my Elvish. Here, he proclaims an oath in Elvish, et earelo endorena utulian, sinome maruvan ar hildinyar ten ambar meta, which translates to, out of the great sea to Middle Earth I am come, in this place will I abide and my heirs unto the ending of the world. So he's claiming this place and saying, look, we're going to be here until the end of time.
I am come when you say those words.
Look,
hold on.
Tolkien experts write in and correct my pronunciations, please. But
do you know a lot of Elvish, or is it just you like?
No.
Like okay. It is
no. I can hack my way through the pronunciations. Certainly much better than when I first read the book. I've brushed up my Elvish chops a little bit. So he says that oath, founds the realm of Arnor in the north. The realm of Gondor is founded by the brothers, Isildur and Anarion in the south. And Elendil founds the city of Anúminas, which becomes the capital of Arnor in the north. And then Anarion in the south founds Minas Anor, and Isildur founds Minas Ithil. And it's in Minas Ithil where he plants the seedling of Nimloth. Look, spoilers, Minas Anor will eventually become Minas Tirith. And there's a reason for that name change. But right now you have Minas Anor, which means Tower of the Sun, and then Minas Ithil, which means Tower of the Moon. So they're kind of sister cities in a sense. And
gotcha.
Minas Tirith is further west in the right on the eastern edge of the White Mountains. It's sort of, as we see wonderfully portrayed in the films, on kind of this cliff edge. And then Minas Ithil is in the mountains to the east on the borders of Mordor.
Gondor.
Well, yes, where Gondor and Mordor sort of...
I see.
At this time, the borders of Gondor shift and fluctuate.
Okay.
But at this time, that's kind of the edge. And it's interesting because Isildur and Anarion rule together Gondor. So it's a joint rule. It's sort of a joint kingship. And then Elendil rules Arnor, but he also has the title of High King. So it's kind of this interesting hierarchy where Elendil, he's really the king of both realms, and then Isildur and Anarion rule Gondor together. So they are not kings yet. But they are jointly ruling Gondor. And their seat is not in Minas Anor or Minas Ithil. It's in Osgiliath.
Okay.
Which means Citadel of the Stars. And it's kind of it's the capital of Gondor, and it's sort of the crown jewel. I mean, we see it in Lord of the Rings. Well, we don't see it in the books, but in the films, we see it, and it's completely ruined, and we get that wonderful scene in the extended Two Towers where Boromir is sort of rallying the troops, and they've retaken it.
Oh, sure.
But it once used to be like the place, sort of the place you wanted to be, a beautiful city, bustling, cosmopolitan, like everything. It was the capital. So you have these 4 main cities in the kingdoms, and between them, the Palantiri are split up. So Elendil has 3 of them, and the 2 brothers have 4 of them. 3 of them in Arnor go to, obviously, Anúminas, the capital. 1 goes to Aman-Sul, which we see in Fellowship of the Ring, Weathertop. That's where that was.
With all the... was that where he was stabbed?
Yes, that's where Frodo is stabbed by the Witch King with a Morgul blade. So that used to be a sort of watchtower of Arnor. And the 3rd one is placed in Elostirion, which is a tower at Tower Hills, far in the west. And it's used by Elendil to look out to Aman. That's its primary purpose. The Elostirion stone does not actually communicate with the other stones. It's kind of unique. And the 4 that go to Gondor, we get 1 in Minas Anor, 1 in Minas Ithil, 1 in Osgiliath, and then the other one goes to Orthanc, which is in Isengard.
First time I'm hearing Orthanc, or am I?
I don't think we've talked about Orthanc yet on this podcast, but that's where Saruman is. So,
hold on. Post drowning in Numenor.
Yes, much further into the future. So,
right.
Brief history on Orthanc. It's built by the Númenóreans. The borders of Gondor at once extended as far north as Orthanc, and so this was built as a fortress, as a watchtower. And eventually it falls into the hands of the Dunlendings, the Wild Men, and it's eventually liberated. And when Saruman comes and begins to interact, the Númenórean, I can't remember which king it is, but one of the Númenórean kings goes, "Hey, you're a trustworthy guy. Like, we don't really have, for various reasons, we don't really have enough people or, power to like maintain this stronghold. We're going to give it to you." And apparently one of the Palantir was still there. So that's why Saruman has that Palantir in The Lord of the Rings.
Gotcha.
That was originally where one of them was placed.
Oh, man. That's pretty cool connective tissue, Alex.
Yes. So we have these 7 stones placed in 7 important places, and they're used to communicate primarily. The one stone that is the most powerful among these 7, that sort of not necessarily controls the 7, but has dominance, is the one in Osgiliath. That's the capital.
So Creepy Uncle was the one who made the Palantir.
Palantiri. Yes, Creepy Uncle Feanor.
How did did you mention this, how the humans got?
Yeah. So we had this conflict between the Kingsmen and the Faithful. And so before that came to a head, you had the elves from Tol Eressëa come and gift some of the Palantiri to Amandiel.
Gotcha.
The master stone for all Palantiri,
which a weird uncle has.
Well, no, because he was banished. He was exiled with the Noldor.
Yeah, right.
But although he'd like to have it to go about his creepy uncle ways, the master stone is in Tol Eressëa. So presumably, I don't think we really know exactly how many Palantiri were made. I could be wrong on that.
I thought you said 18, but maybe I'm crazy.
Could be. I don't know. But we know that 7 were given to the Númenóreans, and that one exists in Tol Eressëa. If there are others, they're probably just in Aman, being used by the elves there.
And do we know how Sauron got his and where from? We don't have to talk about it right now, but do we know?
Yeah, when he got control of Orthanc, there was a...
Because it's in Orthanc.
Yeah.
Wait. I thought Orthanc was the one that Sauron had.
Saruman. We'll get to how Sauron gets a Palantir.
This is what f***s me up.
Their names are so similar.
It's always f***ed me
Honestly,
up.
It's one of those things in Tolkien where, like, I've said this a million times, names are very important. And I'm sure there are very good reasons for etymologically of Sauron and Saruman name-wise. But as your 2 antagonists in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, why'd you got to make their names sound so similar? It's confused many people for generations. It's one of those things.
I love listening to you, and I was like, "Oh, interesting." I remember when he touched the Palantir and he talked to Sauron.
Yes,
but I fucking didn't hear Sauron. I didn't hear you say Sauron.
I might have also said Sauron and confused them myself.
You probably didn't.
Who knows? Check the tapes.
But thank you. I feel a little bit validated.
No, that's a mistake that every single person has made. Because again, Tolkien, why'd you got to make their names so similar? Sauron does end up getting a Palantir, though, and we'll get to that in
that's why I thought I was listening to you. Very interesting. Okay, got it. Or things.
Yes.
Or
so that's how Saruman. So Sauron, speaking of Sauron, after the sinking of Numenor, his spirit goes back to Mordor. And the Númenóreans that are in exile, they're like, well, Sauron died, right? they didn't understand the connection to the One Ring and that he had poured so much of his power into it that must be destroyed for him to really die. So they think he's totally defeated. And Sauron is pissed because remember, his whole thing was, I want revenge on the Númenóreans for defeating me in the War of Elves and Sauron. That was the reason he lost that war, was because you had the reinforcements come, this big fleet. And so he is mad.
So that's when men's were like, oh, we're helpful, right? When they're like, oh, here's our strength.
Yes, that's when they first realized their power. And it only took them, 5 years or whatever to come to Gil-galad's aid.
But I thought he did get revenge because Númenor was sunk.
Well, he did, but he then saw like, oh man, all these Númenóreans escaped. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to sink them all.
Okay, so he's just bitter Betty.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
This was not part of his plan. He was trying to take them all down with him and corrupt them. But
wow.
the resilience of goodness in men won out, and some of them lived on to carry on that the tradition
Not
that Númenor
Círdan.
should have.
Carry on.
What's that?
Not Círdan. Carry
yes,
on.
exactly. So in 3429 of the Second Age, he launches a surprise attack on Minas Ithil, which was right on the border of Mordor, so the closest settlement in Gondor to him, in Mordor. And he, because of this surprise, right, they were like not expecting this attack, he takes Minas Ithil. And Minas Ithil becomes, eventually, it's recaptured by the Gondorians eventually, but it will eventually become recaptured again and become Minas Morgul, which we see as Frodo and Sam are journeying into Mordor. So Isildur is in Minas Ithil. So he is able to repeat this brilliant move he did so many years ago. He escapes, and guess what? Remember the white tree was there? He gets another seedling before he makes his way out.
Come on, this is dumb now.
Yeah, it's like when you ask a magician
stories.
to repeat the trick, and they always say, once is a trick, twice is a lesson. Like, don't repeat it. But he does the same move again. He's just like, yoink, let me just grab a fruit before I go. Maybe he grabbed two and took a bite out of one because got to keep the blood sugar up.
They had to take off the fig leaves, sure.
Yeah. Hopefully he was wearing more than a fig leaf when his life is in danger. So Isildur manages to get out with his family, and he sails up the Anduin river to go to Arnor to seek out Elendil for aid, because he's like, what are we going to do? Let me go to the High King. Let me go to Daddy. And he leaves Anarion to defend Gondor against Sauron. And Anarion does manage to drive Sauron back to the mountains. He doesn't retake Minas Ithil, but he does successfully defend Osgiliath and Minas Anor. And Sauron begins to do the thing he likes to do most, just gather his strength again. He's like, all right, I got one move on you. Successful surprise attack. Now let me prepare for the war that's coming. Now we're going to rewind a little bit to the foundation of Gondor. Because at this point, Isildur is like, they're going full war mode and they're about to launch, start their plan of attack. And one of the things they do is they're trying to assemble all the allies that they can. And back when Gondor was founded, there were these men of the mountains. They were middlemen, so non-Númenóreans, that lived in the White Mountains, the mountain range that runs along, in the Third Age, what's the northern border of Gondor. And these men fell into worship of Sauron, so they were not good guys. But Isildur comes to them as joint ruler of the kingdom that they're currently in, and he says, look, if you promise to leave behind your old ways and swear allegiance to me, that when I call upon you to fight against Sauron, you will, we'll be good. And they do. And they go to the Hill of Eric and swear upon the Stone of Eric, which sort of binds their word.
Aarick?
Erech.
Okay,
Eric.
cool. I guess if you got to name a kid Eric, you could do it that way.
Yeah, it's a cool, hip spelling of it.
Right.
I'm sure they won't have to correct people their entire lives.
Erech?
Erech?
Eric?
So they swear this oath, and before Isildur goes to leave to go to his father, he calls upon them to fulfill their oaths. Right? We're going to fight against Sauron. He's back. Look, we need you. And they say, actually, I don't know about that. And they break their oath. And so Isildur curses them.
This is the ghost army.
Yes, exactly. These are the oath breakers. So these are the men who Isildur curses them to never rest until they fulfill their oath. And this is the army that Aragorn calls upon, the army of undead, of wraiths, to aid in the conflict against Sauron.
Wow.
So this is where that comes from.
Whoa, cool.
And he can do that because he is the
king.
Well, specifically the heir of Isildur. So Isildur is the one who laid this curse upon them, so it's only an heir of his that can
undo the curse, call upon them, not die while going to go get them.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All right. That seems a little less hackneyed.
What, with that context?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they... I will say...
Try beating Sauron without that ghost army. I dare you.
Well, so I will say that in... One of the things I don't quite like... It makes for a cool cinematic moment, but in the films, you have that like sweeping shot of... you have the funny moment of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli just, only those three on the boats facing these Easterlings and Haradrim.
Yeah.
And then the ghost army emerges. Actually, what happens is the Oathbreakers just help them take the ships from the Corsairs of Umbar. And then Aragorn comes with an army of men. Specifically, I believe, from Prince Imrahil and I think that's who accompanies him. I could be wrong. It's been a minute since I've read that part of Return of the King, but he comes with reinforcements on the ships of the Corsairs of Umbar. It's not actually he releases them from their oath before the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
They don't fight.
They fight and help take the ships of the Corsairs,
and that's it.
But they don't just sweep over the battlefield at Pelennor Fields. But that makes for a cool cinematic moment.
Does it though? Because it kind of looks cheesy.
Well, especially, and it makes sense because he cuts out Prince Imrahil. Prince Imrahil is not even in, and Pelargir are not even in the movies, so it doesn't make sense to do all that stuff. Anyway, that's the origin of the Oathbreakers.
Very cool.
So in 3430 of the Second Age, you have the last alliance of elves and men formed by Elendil and Gil-galad. They go, all right, Sauron's actually not defeated. All right, we got to, make a coalition force after consulting with Isildur, who comes up from Anduin. And then a year later, Gil-galad and our boy Círdan, the Bearded, they lead a host.
They won't put beards on the dwarven women, but they'll put a gosh darn beard on an elf.
Right?
I thought I'd live to see the day.
That's what they all sound like. Oh my God. Jesus. I hope he has a beard so much. So they lead a host of elves to Aman-Sul. They meet up with Elendil and his force that he's assembled. And that combined force marches to Rivendell, where they meet Elrond.
Your mom. Oh, sorry. Elrond, not your mom.
No.
Okay, got it.
Elrond Hubbard. And they say, man, that was tiring. and they rest there for 3 whole years. After a city has been taken in the south. You know, these battles and wars, they take a long time. In Tolkien's world, elves live a long time, so 3 years, I'm sure, is nothing for them.
It's a drop in the bucket.
So they rest there, but they don't just rest. They're forging weapons, using the elven smiths there, and they're just planning. What's our plan going to be, right? How do we assail the land of Mordor and Sauron? So after 3 years, they leave. They march down over the Misty Mountains, down the Anduin. And as they go south along the Anduin, they get more reinforcements to join their company. They get some of the Sindar elves, or excuse me, Sylvan elves, not Sindar, Sylvan elves, from Greenwood the Great, aka Mirkwood, as it later becomes known, led by Orifer and his son Thranduil, who is a major player in the Hobbit films, and by proxy, Lord of the Rings, because he is Legolas's father. So him and his dad Orifer and their company of Sylvan elves join, as well as elves from Lorien, led by their king Amdir.
Almadir,
yes. And also, it doesn't say specifically where they join in, but in this Last Alliance, we do get some of Durin's folk fighting as well from Khazad-dûm. So, an interesting note that I don't remember reading, but when I was reading through the appendices, apparently dwarves fought on both sides in this conflict.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, so apparently there were some dwarves that joined up with Sauron.
Apparently there's some dwarves that... Apparently...
And this is like the sort of the idea of the we didn't get into this with Durin's folk, but there's the idea of petty dwarves, which are like Meme is one of the most famous of them, kind of like evil dwarves, because in Tolkien's original conception of dwarves, they were not good guys, and that evolved as he refined his story.
Petty dwarves.
Petty dwarves is what they're called.
I don't know why you omitted that from your story.
Because it didn't. There was already so much, and it didn't have to do with Durin. It's mostly stuff in the first and the first age. But Meme is the most famous, and it's sort of a holdover of Tolkien's original conception of dwarves, because he wanted some of these stories where you had dwarf antagonists. So maybe they were like petty dwarves. It doesn't specify exactly which dwarves fought with Sauron, but we do know that some dwarves fought with Sauron. We don't know how many.
Petty fools.
Yeah.
Right.
Just so
wow.
petty.
Weird.
But Durin's folk join up with this company. So we have, I think this is the last time we have a company of dwarves, elves, and men fighting together. I guess if you count, the Battle of Morannon, which is that last epic battle at the Black Gate in Lord of the Rings. Technically, you got Gimli and Legolas there, but it's not like a company of elves and dwarves. It's just a singular elf and dwarf. So if you want to count that, that's probably the last time that all 3 races like that fought together. And you have hobbits there. Or I don't think in the books you do, actually. So big deal. It's called the Last Alliance for a reason. They're understanding that this is a monumental force, and this is kind of their last play. They must defeat Sauron in this moment. So they all join forces, and they march down to the plains of Dagorlad. Now, these are the plains that lie before the Black Gate on the northern border of Mordor. And as they march into Dagorlad, Anarian's forces come up from the south in Gondor and join up with them. So they're bolstered even more by some of the Gondorian armies. Now, in this battle, the battle of Dagorlad, remember you have Gil-galad leading the elves, right? Now, Gil-galad, he's a Noldor, right? He's the High King of the Noldor.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have these Sylvan elves with them. And the Sylvan elves never went to Aman. They're wood elves. They hung out in the woods. So they actually refuse to be given orders by Gil-galad because they don't recognize him as their king. They're kind of a little arrogant, a little haughty, even for elves. So these old grudges remain, even though they say, look, we can recognize there's a common enemy in Sauron. And so what happens is, before Gil-galad gives the order to attack, they meet Sauron's forces on this big open plain. The Sylvan Elves, they're a little headstrong. They just rush into battle. And they're not even as well equipped as the Noldor, because the Noldor, remember, are the best craftspeople in the land. They had so many years to hone their craft, and also had the knowledge of the Valar from their time in Aman. So they have really good weapons and armor. The Sylvan Elves, they never met the Valar. They never went to Aman, so they're not as well equipped. So they rush in before Gil-galad gives the go-ahead, and they're kind of massacred.
Oh, no.
Orifer, the king of Greenwood, dies. Amdir and his forces are driven and separated from the rest of the company, and they're driven into marshlands nearby, and half of them die, including Amdir. Whoa. So massive casualties among the Sylvan Elves. And those marshes, where they were driven into and slaughtered, become later known as the Dead Marshes. You have this massive amount of graves where these elves are buried.
Gross.
So again, going back to like the Peter Jackson films, they just show the Noldor elves, which makes sense, in the Dead Marshes, but technically it would have been mostly Sylvan elves. So you wouldn't have had the Noldor armor because of their dress. So the Noldor elves would have their awesome armor and stuff.
I see.
The Sylvan elves probably would have. I mean, they're living in the woods. Not that they're not good craftspeople, but they don't have that same training.
Mithril and stuff.
Well, yeah, I don't. The elves probably would not have had mithril, because that's a dwarven thing. Although there was exchange between
the elves
Khazad-dûm.
made mithril, though. The elves made the mithril chainmail.
Yes, but I just don't know if that would have been a common, equipment for their armies, because that comes from the time when you had, the time of Eregion and Khazad-dûm working together, which was much before this.
Gotcha.
So that's the Dead Marshes. You have these, graves, essentially, of the mostly Sylvan elves. So sadly, Orifer and Amdir, these two kings, die. And the Battle of Dagorlad lasts for months. Again, these battles are epic. Eventually, though, Elendil and Gil-galad gain an advantage, and they push their enemy back through the Black Gate and into Mordor. And this is where they lay siege to Barad-dûr. This siege lasts for 7 years, from 3434 to 3441. And a year before the siege is broken by Sauron, Anarion, he kind of comes to an anticlimactic end. How would you think a character like Anarion would die? One of the joint rulers of Gondor, son of Elendil.
Oh my god. I mean, my guess is he trips on a rock, accidentally falls on his sword.
A rock is involved.
I knew it. I just
you nailed it on the head, just like Anarion got nailed on the head. He literally dies because someone throws a rock down from the Tower of Barad-dûr and it hits him in the head.
That's actually embarrassing.
His helmet is crushed in by a rock, and he dies.
Embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, because we talked about Gil-galad and how he dies, which we'll get to in a second. I'm going to recap that. It's such an epic death. And then Anarion is just he gets hit in the head by a rock.
Yeah, because he's a stupid man.
Well, Isildur at least has a cool death, too.
Yeah, but wait, Elendil has a cool death. Isildur does?
Yeah, we'll get to Isildur's death
Okay.
in a second. But yeah, so Anarion dies by getting hit in the head.
Okay, cool.
A year later, I guess they're just, so distraught by Anarion's death. But a year later, Sauron's like...
The Benny Hill music is playing.
They're just running around Barad-dûr, going in and out of the many doors and coming out where you wouldn't expect them.
Yeah.
So a year later, after Anarion's death, Sauron comes forth with a sortie, and he breaks the siege. As we talked about in the Gil-galad episode, he fights Elendil and Gil-galad in single combat and kills them both. Gil-galad with his bare hands of fire. And then and he breaks Elendil's sword of Narsil. Isildur picks up the sword, the shattered sword, cuts the ring from Sauron's hand and defeats him.
Right.
So Isildur brings the ring back to Gondor. Thranduil, Orifer's son, goes back to Greenwood. Everybody goes back. Yay, we won. We defeated evil. Now, here's where we get Círdan entering the story again. Elrond and Círdan, right after this battle, they urge Isildur, destroy the ring. And he claims it as, he says, this I will have as weregild for my father's death and my brother's. Was it not I who dealt the enemy his death blow? So he's using this concept of weregild, which is essentially you're claiming recompense for, wrong done to you in battle. He's using this almost legal kind of tradition as laying claim to the ring. And so Elrond and Círdan go, okay, well, maybe this isn't the best thing to do, but I guess you kind of have a point, not seeing the folly there. And this is kind of where you have these, it's almost a repetition of history, right? Because you had the realms in exile, Arnor and Gondor, coming together with the elves and the dwarves, and they defeated evil, right? But then you have this little shadow creep in, right? And it's kind of what happened in Numenor, right? They won. They defeat Morgoth. They're given this amazing gift, and they allow that shadow, that greed, right? That desire for power to creep in. And the crack, they allow evil to come in, and the crack gets widened and widened and widened. And we're going to see the aftermath of this last alliance and this final battle, that crack is going to get widened. It's not a victory without some defeat afterwards. So what Gondor does is Isildur, he doesn't destroy the ring, obviously, brings it back to Gondor. Gondor builds fortresses all around Mordor. They build Duarthang, the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and what are called the Towers of Teeth, which are at the Black Gate. And they basically say, look, we're going to just guard Mordor in case anything happens. There's still like remnants of orcs and stuff. And, even though Sauron's defeated, his spirit goes east past Mordor. But they set up this guard on Mordor. Isildur's back in Minas Anor, and he assumes the throne, right? His brother's dead, his father's dead. So he assumes the title of King of Arnor and High King of the Realms in Exile. And remember, he had taken that seedling from Minas Ithil?
Correct.
He finally gets around to planting it in Minas Anor, so what would later become Minas Tirith.
Okay.
In memory of his brother. And he hands rule of Gondor to Anarion's son, Meneldil. So this is the first time Gondor has had a single ruler.
Oh.
But Isildur still assumes the title of High King and King of Arnor. Now in the Second Age, Isildur leaves to go rule over his kingdom. And he leaves with his 3 eldest sons. His 4th son is in Rivendell. Because remember, he took his family up to Arnor when he went to talk to his dad, and then they marched to Rivendell. His son was, I think, 1 year old at the time. So his son and his wife stayed, his youngest son and his wife stayed in Rivendell. So they were still there. They didn't obviously march back to where this giant battle was going to take place. So the reason he goes up the Anduin is because that will take him right past Rivendell. Because he could have easily, instead of going up the Anduin, gone west and north up through that path to get to Arnor. And that probably would have been a more direct route, but he wanted to go to Rivendell. And so he has with him his 3 eldest sons. And this is where the disaster at the Gladden Fields happens. They're ambushed along the Anduin at the Gladden Fields. Him and his sons are slain. And Isildur, he tries to escape, puts on the One Ring. He's swimming in the river, and it betrays him, falls off his finger. He's shot down by orcs.
Gotcha.
So the One Ring is lost. Dun, dun, dun. And we all know the story of how it's found. Gollum, well, maybe we don't.
Go for it now. Let's digest all of the Lord of the Rings.
Gollum Smeagol eventually ends up finding it, and then
all right, I'm just
Lord of the
kidding.
Rings. Blah, blah, blah. So he's dead. He was the High King. He was the King of Arnor. So his son, his younger son, I think he's 13 at this time. Valandil is his son's name. He becomes the king. He's not old enough to rule yet, so there's an interim period. But then we have the realm of Arnor, and I want to just very briefly run down some of the stuff that happens in the Third Age to kind of, again, connect this with Lord of the Rings. So in Arnor, the major events are that kind of cause its downfall, because by the time of Lord of the Rings, there is really no Arnor, right? You just have kind of these loose, settlements of men, and the hobbits are there. The line of kings continues for a while, but after the 10th king's rule, Eärendil, he has 3 sons, and there's a civil war that breaks out between these 3 sons over who should rule, and they basically each form their own realms that they rule over, which are Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. So you have this, you don't need to, these names are unimportant. They are, but not for our purposes currently. So you have this realm of Arnor that's sort of in disarray. And the Witch King, right? Remember, the Nazgul are still around, right? The Witch King seizes this opportunity, and he sets up shop in Angmar, which is to the north of Arnor. And he attacks them. And you have this war and these many battles that are fought between the Witch King and the realm of Arnor. Eventually, after many deaths and changes politically, you get help from the elves. Arnor gets help from the elves, and they're able to, in this big climactic battle, which actually hobbits partake in 1601 of the Third Age. The hobbits were living, majority of them were living in Dunland at the time, which is like to the south of Arnor, kind of between Arnor and where Isengard is. The hobbits are given the area that would become the Shire, which used to be the king's old hunting grounds. This is where he would hunt game. And so they're gifted this realm or this, little pocket of land to inhabit by the king. And I think like 30, 40, 50 years after they're given that, pretty much all the hobbits live there. They just all migrate to the Shire. Wow. Because they're like, this is great. This is idyllic. And they're, faithful and servants of the king. So in this final battle, actually, hobbits fight. It's said that hobbits sent a few archers to fight in this battle against the Witch King. And they do end up defeating the Witch King, but the only remaining kingdom left, Arthedain, is pretty much utterly wiped out in this. They use the last of their strength. So what happens after this, they've driven out evil, but the realm of Arnor is basically in ruin. They've lost, through various calamities, 2 of the Palantiri.
Lost them or were destroyed?
They were lost at sea.
I see, okay.
The only remaining one is the one in Elostirion, which can't communicate with the other ones. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's making me think now how the one that Sauron has, when Gandalf says, "We don't know where the other ones. You don't know who could see in." Couldn't you look into it and see where all of them are?
No, because
it doesn't work like that.
No.
Okay.
Well, there's a couple things about how the Palantiri work. the things you're able to do are related to the power and will of the person using them. So when Aragorn picks it up, he's got a strong will. He's able to do a lot more than Pippin when he uses it, right? And it's not exactly like, oh, I'm looking through a ring camera. It's used for communication.
I see.
So it enables mental communication between people who are using the Palantiri.
Okay. Okay.
And it does give you limited ability to see other things and distant things, but it doesn't quite
like make you realize where they all are, or
no, that's not quite how they work, and it's also fuzzy how they work. Tolkien doesn't set hard and fast rules.
Stupid uncle was fuzzy too.
Yeah, why didn't he make a manual for these things? Come on,
what a dimwit.
So the other two are lost at sea. The Elves stone is the only one that's left, and that's eventually taken into the Grey Havens at the end of the Third Age. So all those stones are eventually gone. But what ends up happening is you have the line of kings that basically says, well, we don't really have a kingdom to rule over anymore, this line of kings of Arnor. And so the first person to cast off the title of king of Arnor and become chieftain is Aranarth. And he basically takes his people and they become a nomadic roaming people. They don't have a kingdom. They don't have fortresses really even if they could take up in a fortress, they don't have enough people to defend it. So they become the Rangers of the North.
Oh.
So they wander, they're nomadic, they wander around Arnor and protect the lands as they can. And Aranarth's son happens to be in Rivendell and was raised in Rivendell. And so his son Arahale, who's his successor, following him, every single chieftain of the Rangers is raised in Rivendell. Going all the way down, eventually, to Aragorn, son of Arathorn, who is raised in Rivendell, and also his father dies at a young age because he's killed by orcs, which happens to a lot of the chieftains. A lot, because they're just wandering around protecting people. So like they're defending the realms from these agents of evil. So a lot of them die prematurely. So that's what happens. That's what happens to Aragorn. His dad dies and he's raised in Rivendell. So that's why he's descendant of the Rangers, and is of the line of Isildur, and also an Aryan. But we won't get into the genealogy too much. So that's where the chieftains of the Rangers of the North come from, and that takes us all the way down to Aragorn. So briefly going over to Gondor, there's so much history here. Folks, if you're interested, we might do an episode all about like Gondor and the Third Age in the future, but here's a brief rundown. For about 900 years, they go into a golden age. There's some conflicts. Eventually they're raided like 400 years into the Third Age by some Easterlings. There's some wars and fighting that breaks out, but their borders expand greatly. But during the second millennium, so year 1000 and beyond in the Third Age, you have three major things that lead to kind of the diminishing of Gondor. Number one, you have this invasion of Easterlings from there and wars and battles. Number two, you have a civil war that ends up happening. Eldakar is one of the kings, and in an attempt to his father, in an attempt to sort of improve political relations, marries someone who's descendant from the Northmen, the people of Ravanian, which is like Rohan. And a lot of people don't like this because they're like, she's not of Númenorian heritage. You're mixing heritages and you're going to dilute the royal bloodline.
Gross.
And everything. Yeah, it's not that good. So a civil war breaks out, and when Eldakar, that person of mixed descent, becomes ruler. Just you have these people who are okay with it, and you have these people who are like, no, he is the true heir. He's the first and eldest son. And so you have this guy Castamir, who's from Umbar, who has royal blood, but he's descendant from not Eldakar's father, but Eldakar's younger brother. So he's like, doesn't have the heir, like doesn't have the lineage, but he's of royal blood. So he eventually wrests control of the kingship from Eldakar, but long story short, does a lot of things people don't like. He's kind of ruthless in his rule, and eventually Eldakar ends up taking over. But this just massive death, political unrest, destabilization. It also leads to Umbar. That's why there's such a rivalry between Gondor and Umbar, because Umbar, Castamir's from
Where
Umbar.
were they when the Westfall fell?
Well, that's Gondor, but yes,
I know.
that's another big rivalry. There's a lot of bad blood there. So that's why there's this sort of Umbar and Gondor very antagonistic towards each other, because Castamir ends up being killed, and his sons go on to become like the Corsairs of Umbar, and I believe that's what happens. Needless to say, they're not pleased with Gondor and their current leadership, or that line. During that civil war, Osgiliath is completely devastated, and the Palantir there is lost. So another Palantir we don't know what happened to. And that's like the big one, right? That's the one that connects them all. And then the last thing that happens to sort of cause this sort of, not downfall, but shrinking in power of Gondor is there's a great plague. And this plague actually sweeps across all of Middle-earth. And it was engineered by Sauron and the Witch King. Bad stuff. So you have tons of death due to this plague. During this plague, the White Tree dies. But thankfully, the king during that time, King Torondor,
grabbed a sapling.
He had a seedling. There's all these seedlings lying around. And he plants a new one. So we have, it's, again, just like the line of kings, it's descendant from Nimloth. It's fine.
Hell, I could take a fruit from the tree now and have one.
Yeah, exactly. Just go to your local nursery, folks. You'll find
tree and you propagate.
Everyone can be their own botanist and make their own seedling of Nimloth.
Sounds good to me.
But so you have this plague, and again, you have massive amounts of death. And so because of this, the population of Gondor and just Middle-earth in general is greatly reduced. And so the Gondorians have to abandon their fortresses and their fortifications along the borders of Mordor. So all of these things they've built have been abandoned, and later they will be taken up again by the forces of evil.
Oh no!
So Durthang, the Towers of Teeth, and the Black Gate, which for a while the Gondorians were manning the Black Gate, and Cirith Ungol. Cirith Ungol is the tower where Frodo gets taken to after he's stung by Shelob.
Right.
That used to, that was built by the Gondorians, but they had to abandon it because they didn't have enough people.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then we come to the last king of Gondor before Aragorn, Eärnur, King Eärnur. Now, during his rule is when Minas Ithil is once again captured by the Witch King, and it finally becomes Minas Morgul. And this is where Sauron gets the Palantir, presumably. Now, the Witch King repeatedly sends messengers to Minas Anor, taunting Eärnur. Remember, Gondor used to be a beautiful, wonderful place, and now it's fallen into sort of disarray and ruin. He's taunting him, challenging him to single combat. And after enough of these messages, he finally, in his rage, is like, all right, I'm coming out there. He brings a few of his men, rides out to Minas Morgul to face the Witch King in one-on-one combat. No one ever sees him again. Now, it's never confirmed whether or not he dies. Presumably he does. But because of this, he has... there is after him no claimant to the throne that I don't believe he has direct descendants, but there would have been potential relatives that had, like multiple potential relatives that had claims to the throne through him.
But, if he officially died.
Yes. But I mean, in his absence, right? Someone would have to step up and say like, hey, I'm claiming the throne. But remember what happened you had this massive civil war just, relatively soon. So no one does, because Gondor is on the brink. And they saw what happened. They've been hit with this plague. They had this civil war where, friends were killing friends and just massive death, and it was bad. So no one wants to repeat history. So no one comes up that would have a claim on the throne and claims it, because they don't want the same political conflict to happen that happened to them prior. And so this is where you get the line of stewards.
Sure.
In the place of any legitimate heir that could have claimed the throne, you have the steward taking over rulership. And from there, you have the line of stewards. And it said, well, if there's an heir to Isildur, right? Because remember, this is the line of Anarion. Mm-hmm. Anarion is the one who's Meneldur. Am I saying that right? His son. What was his name? Meneldur? Whatever his name is. Send in your corrections. Correct me, folks. This is not the line of Isildur, but they say, well, if Isildur, who is the High King, right, he can reunite the realms. The realms were split between Anarion and Isildur's rule. So that's where you get this thing where the stewards are ruling until an heir of Isildur comes and claims that he's High King, and then he can reunite the kingdoms. So that basically leads us up to then Aragorn and everything that happens with that in The Lord of the Rings. And that's a very brief overview. There's so many things that happen in between, but that's kind of the broad strokes.
You know what I'm realizing is I really want to know more about the 9 kings of men and who they were.
I do as well. We don't know a ton about them.
Okay. All right.
We know some.
Okay.
But not a ton.
All right. Maybe we'll do a little bit of extra homework.
There are so many topics I would love to do episodes on. One of them being like the entire history of Gondor in the Third Age. That might be a 2-part episode if we end up doing that. Doing something on, the Nazgul, maybe. There's so many topics. I mean, hey, if you're out there listening,
tell us what you want.
Yeah, if you are like, I've always wanted to know more about this, like write in, send us your letters. What do you want us to talk about? We don't do
anything until this podcast. We just sit inert.
I'm waiting.
Waiting.
The only thing I do is go through my copy of Lord of the Rings and Unfinished Tales and Silmarillion and just do all the research and reading. That's all I do.
No, you know it intrinsically.
I wish.
Yeah, you just put the book against your head and it's like, oh, I got it all.
Just download it into my head.
Well, as always, Alex, thank you so much for this amazing digestion of lore and for putting in the work to make it understandable for us. I think I got it. I think I got it now. I don't think we need to do another episode ever again.
That's it.
I got it.
We're done.
That's it. Speaking of which, next week, who are we going to talk about?
Next week, we're going to talk about the big bad himself.
Oh.
Sauron.
Anatar.
Well, Anatar.
Sauron.
/ Sauron.
Anatar.
Yeah. Who has obviously played a major part in the last 2 episodes, but his history goes back a little further.
What a loser he is. Such a loser. Just so you know, in case you're not aware, we have a Patreon, and right now we have a goal to get $100 worth of patrons a month so that we can get an editor for this podcast. That way we can bring even more content to you by saving me a little bit of work if possible. But yeah, I think that's a good community goal that we can reach together. There is one slot of a tier available. If you want to be the One Ring possessor, you can be our patron for $100 and you will get a shirt that says, I'm a patron of Podcast of the Rings, and all I got was this lousy shirt. If you really want that, that is waiting for you. There's also other things that you can get just by being a friend of the show at lower tiers, of course. So help us get to $100, folks.
Make it happen. We're about to do the Sauron episode, so someone jump on that One Ring. Claim it.
It could be. Well, because what happens is you'll be announced at the top of the show or at the end of the show as a friend of the show. So it doesn't come with nothing. Just so you're aware. What is our Patreon URL, Alexander?
It is Pod of the Rings. It's patreon.com/Pod of the Rings.
Yeah, that's it. Pod of the Rings on Twitter, podcastoftherings@gmail.com to let us know all the things that we missed. And until next week.
May our roads meet again.